All right, so it is 6 o'clock. I think we are ready to get started. So welcome everyone to the Fisheries Defense Kickoff. We have a jam-packed schedule, so I am going to pass it right off to Karen Han.
Great, thanks a lot, Max. Hi everyone, my name is Karen Han and I'm the Vice President for Coastal Conservation at the National Audubon Society based in Washington, D.C. I wanted to really thank all of you for your interest in Audubon's coast strategy and for spending time with us today. All of you in our network are the engine of our organization, and we can't thank you enough for your engagement on these issues that are critical to shorebirds and seabirds. I'm extremely pleased to introduce you to our coast team today. Please see us as a resource as we work collectively to save birds in the places they need. Our presentation will start with Anna Weinstein, the Marine Program Director for Audubon, California, Steve Kress, the Executive Director of the Seabird Restoration Program and Vice President for Bird Conservation, Don Lyons, the Science Director for the Seabird Restoration Program, Charlotte Renzel, the Coastal Policy Associate, and Maddox Wolf, our Coastal Campaigns Manager. So without further ado, we look forward to working with all of you on these issues, and I'll pass the mic over to Anna.
Thank you so much, Karen, for that introduction. I join you in thanking our participants so much for spending your time with us this evening or afternoon. So I'm going to quickly share with you examples of how the California State Office has teamed with West Coast chapters to secure wins for forage fish that our birds like the rhinoceros auklet pictured here depend on. Next slide, please. Our focus area is this large region off our west coast on the right, made up primarily of federal waters, known as the exclusive economic zone. The west coast is one of our planet's handful of productive upwelling areas, which are can be considered special ecological zones, shown here on the left, supporting a unusually high abundance and diversity of birds and other marine wildlife. There's a lot to protect here. Next slide, please. Thanks. There you go. Until recently, forage fish in this large area, the exclusive economic zone, 380,000 square miles approximately. So forage fish like the McTophid on the left, a deep water species, and neon flying squid on the right were unprotected and unmanaged. So that means anyone could simply notify our federal Fisheries Management Agency, the National Marine Fisheries Service, and go out fishing with no restrictions. This put birds at risk because industrial scale fisheries on these and other species have developed elsewhere and could develop here. We needed to get ahead of this threat. And the goal was not to block fishing opportunity, but rather to create a high bar for starting a fishery to ensure take levels would not negatively affect predators. So first, Audubon California teamed with the Pew Trust and Oceana to promote this idea with fisheries managers and industry. Next slide, please. Once we got some traction there, we were able to bring in the larger Audubon network, which contributed in two key ways. First of all, Sea and Sage Audubon, located in Southern California, and Audubon Society of Portland in Oregon, provided some critical local perspective on how protecting these forage fish would support birds that they care about in their areas, their quality of life, and their economies. Staff and volunteers wrote comment letters, testified at meetings when held locally, and got an excellent reception and response from decision makers you can see pictured on the right. Next slide, please. Secondly, our national action alerts for this campaign generated over 18,000 support letters to the agency. This represented about 20% of all the support letters. And we were just really thrilled when in the final rule that NOAA issued on this action, the agency noted, and I quote, "It appreciates the broad public interest in this rulemaking and has taken the strong public support it received during the comment period into account in its approval of this final rule." So there it is in black and white, or in this case blue, the agency calling out public support as making a crucial difference here. Next slide, please. The final rule summarized below, which you can read for yourself if you like. So now dozens of species of forage fish, many of which are known to be important for birds, are permanently protected from overfishing off our west coast. And there's some press on the right. Next slide, please. That project wrapped up in about 2016, and currently I'm working with 2 Southern California chapters, Sea and Sage, like I mentioned before, and San Diego Audubon, to protect one of our key forage fish on the coast, which is subject to a commercial fishery. Northern anchovy is critical for endangered least tern and dozens of other birds. Next slide, please. Just last month, I teamed with Sea and Sage Audubon and San Diego Audubon in our multi-year campaign to bring northern anchovy into better compliance with the Magnuson-Stevens Act and ensure this key prey species for birds is well managed. So chapter staff such as Susan Shakely on the bottom left produce content like this article, Anchovy, not just another pizza topping. These folks pictured with me earlier in November wearing our Tern Watchers hats. Next slide, please. So chapter staff and volunteers from these chapters came to the fisheries meeting in November in Southern California and spoke to fisheries managers about the decades of stewardship on the part of these chapters for California least tern, which is an anchovy-dependent coastal bird. This generated lively discussion and a real response from the decision makers, moving our advocacy campaign forward in some real ways. So these are just 2 quick examples that I hope begin to illustrate the unique power of our network to protect forage fish, defend Magnuson-Stevens, our effective and hardworking federal management framework. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the presentations.
Thank you, Anna. Great, we're gonna pass it off to Steve Kress.
Thank you, Karen, and everybody that is tuned in for this conversation. I run the Audubon Seabird Restoration Program, part of the Audubon Science Division. It's a program that started with a very focused goal to restore puffins to nesting islands off the coast of Maine. That's been very successful. It started long before people talked about climate change, and we realized how important forage fish conservation was to seabird conservation. So now, with new perspectives, our work is continuing to enlighten us in many ways I never would have thought of before. Next picture. This program, really, the restoration program gets most of its attention around puffins, but of course, puffins are only part of a complex ecosystem. And these little puffins have taught us many things over the years about how to restore seabird colonies. And now the new lessons they're telling us are about the complicated ways that climate change is interfacing with fishes and fisheries management. Next picture. Our story goes back 100 years to the passage of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. This, of course, is the year of the bird. We've been hearing about that all year. It's the year of the bird every year for those of us that really care about seabirds. But this year, it's a time to reflect back on how far we've come. Great successes in many ways. Some of the biggest problems have been solved, but new problems are ahead of us. Next. Puffins have been our focus. They have greatly increased along the coast, but how long will they increase, and what is their future? Those are important questions that are really up to us to determine. Next. It comes as a surprise, I think, for many people to realize that the Maine coast is a very actively managed place, perhaps one of the most actively managed places on the world for seabirds. It's a place where people are making a difference every day. This is our study area, the Gulf of Maine, and all those red spots are places where young conservation biologists live during the summer. Next picture. Audubon manages 7 of those starred islands, and it hires about 25 different young biologists every summer to live on these islands. I want to just show you a few of these sites, because this is where the science is happening that's helping us learn about seabirds and what they need to live. Next. Matinicus Rock, the place where seabirds survived, where puffins, only a few pairs survived, is one of our places. We have the privilege of living in the historic lighthouse. That's as a puffin a biologist goes, that's about as elegant as it can get. More often, next slide, the researchers live in little tents on islands, sometimes just 2 of them at a time, out there for months at a time. And what are they doing? Well, they're helping to chase off predators. That's part of the job. It's an ongoing need to keep the eagles and the gulls from eating our rare seabirds. But while they're there, doing that good work, they have opportunities to take close looks at the seabirds. The next picture shows one of our camps. This is the Seal Island camp where the researchers live in little tents. Each person has privacy when they need it and shelter from the storms that sweep over this island. But most of their day is not spent even in this humble lodging. Next picture. Most of their day is spent out in the field among the birds. Here at Eastern Egg Rock, where Project Puffin has its roots, you can see there's no trees, there's no shelter at all, but that's where the biologists live for at least in the summer, 3 months at a time without getting off of this rock. Next picture. Puffins have told us a lot about what's happening under the water, and that's the beauty of seabirds. It's very hard to see what the fish are doing, even where they are, or even what level they're at. But the puffins are very good at finding food, and because they come out of the water with their beaks loaded with fish, they're telling us what's happening under the water. Next picture. These are the same puffins that we restored from Canada. 2,000 young puffin chicks were brought from Maine, from Newfoundland to Maine, and now the original birds that we moved have passed on, even though they can live to be 30 plus years old. We're in the 2nd and 3rd, 4th generations now. Next picture. Our researchers continue to live on the island, but now with very different tasks. We're no longer moving young puffins. Now we're living among the seabirds, taking notes on what they're eating, like this Arctic tern. There are 3 species of terns. Arctic terns, next picture, shows a common tern getting a meal from its parent, and the endangered roseate tern. These 3 species of terns feed their chicks above ground. By sitting there and watching carefully, we can see what the chicks are eating, not just what kinds of food, but how big the food is and how frequently the chicks are fed. Next picture. The puffins are telling us some of the same things. It takes a very careful observer to really see what a puffin chick is eating. Next picture. Shows that the puffin population has been on the increase, but in 2012 and 13, the population took a dive. And up until that point, we didn't really see how climate change was affecting puffins. But that year we noticed, as did everyone else. Take a look at this news clip here on the next picture. This was our first evidence, and it made national news, that the climate was in fact affecting seabirds, and their population began to fluctuate, especially as the temperature of the ocean increased. Next picture. We see that this is a trend. It's a long-term trend and a steeper short-term trend. Since about 2005, the sea surface temperatures have been going up and spiking at some very high numbers. You see that highest point there is 2012, and that was the year we had fewer puffins nest, and that was the year that our eyes opened to this relationship. Next picture. Other things are changing too, like the time of the year the plankton are most abundant. This is what's called the spring transition. They are having their plankton bloom about 2 weeks earlier than they used to on the Maine coast, and less plankton in the water than there was when the water was consistently cold. Different species of plankton are changing too, because everything is connected. Next picture. So our interns who began living there to feed little puffin chicks, hoping to restore the colony, that succeeded in restoring the colony, their task is different now. The next picture shows one of our interns inside of the egg rock. We call it the egg rock Hilton, modest kind of Hilton as it is. And here is one of the researchers. It's solar powered, entering data into her laptop. Next picture shows how the interns spend most of their day during 3-hour blind stints at a time, just a few feet, literally a few feet away from nesting birds, using cameras. Take a look at this next picture, and you'll see the kind of photos the researchers bring back to the cabin to look at. With photos like these, they can count the numbers of fish, they can look at the size of fish, the species of fish, and by sitting in the blinds from dawn to dark a couple days every week, they take turns doing this, they know how often the chicks are fed. Next picture. Some of the results, well, we're seeing the foods are changing. Puffins used to eat mostly herring and hake. Now as the water warms, they eat these larger butterfish and more southerly fish, or scrappy little fish like sticklebacks and puffers. Not much food value there at all. Next slide. Some of them, like the butterfish, are actually too big for the chicks to swallow, and in those years, the chicks can die in their burrows. All of this, we've learned, especially after last year, has a lot to do with the sea surface temperatures. Next picture. There's a good news part of this story too, and this is where it relates to fisheries management. The kinds of fish is changing. We're seeing new fish being added to the puffin's diet. The puffin is actually, as auks go, as alcids go, it's a generalist feeder. It will feed on whatever's out there in the water, either small or large. It doesn't even have to be a fish. It could be a shrimp or a squid, whatever is within the top 60 feet of the water column, puffins will bring back. And so they sample what is out there, and they're finding more and more haddock. Why? Because of the Magnuson-Stevens Conservation Act that has made it possible for the haddock population to recover from being overfished. That's a good news story, and that connects tightly to why that act is so important to protect and strengthen. Next slide. We also saw a few years ago puffins coming back with a bizarre little fish that we'd never seen before. We sent some of these off to be identified, and the next picture shows what we discovered. These were young of the year Acadian redfish, also known as ocean perch, another overfished species. Again, another fish that is increasing because of the Magnuson-Stevens Fisheries Act. We think that act is going to make the difference. And new protections for herring passed this year are going to help bring back the herring to the puffin's diet as well. Next picture. It takes a lot of friends to keep the puffins on the islands, supporting Project Puffin, and those people often learn about it through these cams. Explore.org is one of our partners in this project, and they've put cams out on the islands. I hope some of our observers are on this call today. If you haven't watched the cams, please do. They'll be back up running in May. Next picture. Another way to enjoy seabirds and realize their economic value is to go on a puffin watching trip. Nearly 10,000 people a year are now cruising around our restored puffin colonies, not landing, not disturbing the birds, but learning about them from Audubon guides on board. Next. And the best way of all, of course, is to spend 5 days on beautiful Hog Island, National Audubon's legendary learning center here on Hog Island, just a few miles from eastern Egg Rock. I'll be out there next summer. Don and others from Audubon will be there as well as your instructors. I hope you'll spend a few days with us on Hog Island. Next picture. Not everybody can be on the islands. Our researchers have the privilege of living there, doing this good, hard work. Next picture. One of the rewards of this is pulling out little puffin chicks, weighing them carefully, measuring them, realizing those birds would not be there if it wasn't for Audubon and for people who care about them. But keeping them there is all about what we're trying to do with saving little fish. The puffins and other seabirds are telling us about the little fish. It's up to the rest of us to make sure we do the right things. The new challenge is to keep the oceans from overwarming and to keep more fish in the water. So thank you. very much for everything you do for caring about seabirds. I'll just have one more picture, and that is a lead to our next speaker. This is Don Lyons. I'm happy to announce that he's joined Audubon as our Director of Conservation Science for the Seabird Restoration Program. And Don's going to tell us now about some of the details of what we're learning about seabirds on the Audubon Islands. Don?
Well, thanks, Steve. That's a great introduction. And thanks to everyone who's tuned in today for your interest in both birds, seabirds, shorebirds, and the forage fish that many of these species rely on to raise their chicks and survive throughout the year. Here we have a couple common terns, and there we see one of them carrying an Atlantic herring, which is a fish species that Steve mentioned, which is particularly important to seabirds in the Gulf of Maine. Next slide. As Steve mentioned, I want to just touch on some of the details of what our fantastic young biologists spend so much effort and hard work to collect. And one way we use those data is to describe the diet of puffins, and in particular puffin chicks. And this pie chart on this slide shows a breakdown of the most common prey types or fish types that were in the diet at one colony, Seal Island National Wildlife Refuge, just this past summer. And you can see haddock was a very large component of the diet, even more than half of the diet. And several other species were very important as well. One important thing to note is that herring, for example, played a very small part of the diet. That's a signal of how the Gulf of Maine and oceans more broadly are changing with climate change. Next slide. Thanks. So in the Gulf of Maine, we've been learning a lot we've been learning a lot from the birds and working to relate that to what else people are learning about the ocean. This figure shows some ocean temperatures. That red line is the daily average temperature of the ocean at the surface over the past summer during 2018. And then there's an average, long-term average in the black line. And the yellow shading shows kind of the range of those daily temperatures. If you look carefully at the late July and early August period, you see a couple peaks in the red line in this summer's ocean temperatures. And especially that early August period was much warmer than had ever been seen at that time. And that peak is probably the warmest the surface of the ocean had ever gotten in the Gulf of Maine, at least right by this buoy, which is stationed out in the Gulf. Taking that temperature data, we can relate that to how the birds are doing by comparing it to how much food is delivered to young puffins. This figure here shows the food deliveries to one particular puffling named Grace, which was the Explore.org chick, the camera chick that many people observed this past summer. We were fortunate enough that one such volunteer, Julie Wallace, compiled the feeding data that Grace received, and we can compare those data to the temperatures that were present. And we can see that when the temperatures were warmest in the late July and early August period, the feeding was very slow. Adult puffins were having a hard time finding food, and some puffins spent entire days only getting one delivery of food. We also noticed that after that warm period, kind of amazingly, when things cooled off, adult puffins got right back to work, were able to find more fish, and we saw the feeding rates jump right up. And even one day, Grace received 19 loads of fish in one day, which was really quite amazing. But Grace was one of the lucky ones. Not all the puffins survived that period, not all the pufflings survived that period of very warm temperatures and slow feeding. Some starved, but those that did make it through were able to recover, catch up, and many were able to fledge and leave the island and pursue their lives. Next slide. That feeding rate is an important part of how fast puffins grow. And this figure shows their growth, their pattern of growth, as they emerge from the egg and then all the way up until that time when they fledge, when they leave the island. These bars, these blue bars, represent how much a puffin either gained in mass, in grams, or you can see during that very warm period in early August, some pufflings were losing mass. They were starving. And so the amazing relationship between the surface temperature and how that impacts where fish are, either forcing some fish to go too deep in the water column for puffins to catch them, or perhaps move away from the colonies, perhaps move out of the Gulf of Maine altogether. So that temperature, that physical factor, and the relationship it has to climate change, impacts birds in the Gulf of Maine and really everywhere in very real and tangible ways, such as their ability to feed young, keep those young alive, and raise them to development. Next slide. So puffins and other seabirds are, of course, not the only consumer of these small forage fish. We can see kind of in blue here that seabirds generally take young fish, and fisheries, using fixed gear or mobile gear or whatever types of fishing gear, generally target older and larger fish. That's an opportunity for us to use seabirds to tell us something useful for fisheries. If seabirds are catching lots of very young fish, there will probably be more fish for fisheries in a year or 2 or 3 when those fish grow up. So one thing that we're working on is to use seabirds to help manage forage fish. And that can be both for the benefit of seabirds, which is of course important to all of us, but also that can really benefit forage fish populations so that we know when it's safe to fish for commercial fishermen to catch a lot, and when it's not safe for that to happen. Next slide. One way that Audubon's work is really impacting fisheries management is through the voices of everyone throughout the Audubon network, and through us using your support as a platform. When the herring management process was happening this fall for the Gulf of Maine, for the entire Northeast, a number of Audubon members spent quite a bit of time asking for ecosystem-based management. And there have been some signs of progress there. The Fishery Management Council for the Northeast has scaled back Atlantic herring harvest. And an unexpected byproduct is that folks with the National Marine Fisheries Service have reached out to us to see if the data we collect on birds can help them manage forage fish. So we're working with them. Actually, I had a call with folks even earlier today on how we can use seabirds to help improve forage fish management and for the betterment of both birds and fish. And with that, I'll wrap up and let our next speaker move on.
Hi there. I'm Charlotte Renzel. I work as a Coastal Policy Associate. And today I'm going to cover federal fisheries policy. So where all of that good science Steve and Don talked about kind of interacts with existing policies, and then also ways to make changes to those existing policies. Next slide, please. So I'm going to primarily talk about the Magnuson-Stevens Act. The Magnuson-Stevens Act, or the MSA for short, is the only law that governs management of U.S. fish in federal waters. It's a cornerstone environmental law that has improved the health of fish populations and ocean ecosystems since 1976. Over its lifetime, the MSA has rebuilt 44 populations of overfished species, ensured that overfishing is at an all-time low, helped the U.S. emerge as a world leader in fisheries management. And it has paved the way for fisheries management in general. The last reauthorization was in 2007, but like all laws, the MSA needs an update to strengthen its dependence on science while taking into account the needs of birds. This theory is also called ecosystem-based fisheries management. There, however, have been attempts to weaken this law. So the efforts are trying to weaken this law so more fish can be caught now without looking towards the future. By weakening this law, predators like seabirds, marine mammals, and other fish suffer just for short-term gains. If this law is weakened, we will go back to the days of boom and bust fishing, where there's not enough fish for everyone. Managing fisheries responsibly means that there are more fish in the ocean that reproduce and grow their population, so all stakeholders, including birds, can have their fair share. Next, thank you. So like I said in the last slide, there have been efforts to weaken this law by undermining its core science conservations while muddling the law with ambiguous loopholes. If these legislations were passed, the efforts will reverse decades of progress that have brought more fish to the oceans for birds, wildlife, and people. Despite efforts to weaken this law, we're actually working to give it a boost. So we're working with lawmakers to pass forage fish legislation, which leaves more food in the ocean for birds and their predators. Currently, when setting the amount of forage fish that can be taken out of the ocean, birds and other predators are not taken into account. But we want to change this. This legislation updates the MSA to include the needs of birds and other wildlife to ensure their reproduction, survival, and overall health. Forage fish legislation is also beneficial for the many stakeholders I showed you in the previous slide. And we're working with a coalition that includes recreational anglers, marine manufacturers, and other conservation groups that come together because forage fish fuels the entire marine ecosystem that many folks' livelihood depends on. So for example, recreational and commercial fish like black sea bass, cod, tuna, and marine mammals like whales, dolphins, and seals, and almost every single seabird need forage fish to grow, reproduce, and survive. Next slide, please. So our overall goal, next slide, please. Thank you. So our overall goal is to make the Magnuson-Stevens Act a more bird-friendly law. Right now, they don't take into account the needs of seabirds when setting catch limits, and that's something we'd like to update. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and we can address them at the end. And now Maddox Wolf is our next speaker.
All right, thank you so much, Charlotte. So hi everyone, my name is Maddox Wolf. I am the Coastal Campaigns Manager. So some of you may remember all the way back in 2015, a lifetime ago, that there was a study on seabirds that was released. It was looking at the population numbers of seabirds from the years 1950 to 2010. And what the authors of that study concluded was that seabird numbers had declined globally by 70%. And that's a meaningful number for us because seabird population changes are really good indicators of long-term and large-scale change in marine ecosystems. So it's not all doom and gloom though. We can make the connection, and as Audubon members, it's up to us to sound the alarm and to call for action on this, because if not us, the largest bird conservation network in the United States, then who else? And we can be the voice to call for action because we're Audubon than helping terns. You know, that's how we got started. So we have this opportunity in 2019 in Congress to do a very real and very direct way, a very clear policy to protect birds. So first, before I want to go any further talking about advocacy, I want to ground us in our values. So we are a network of over 1 million people, and we all come with our own unique stories and experiences. But ultimately, what connects us all is that we also all share a very deep and personal value around conservation and our love for birds. And we act on those values because we know that we are stronger together than when we act alone. We also know that power does not come from money, does not come from lobbyists. We know that power comes from people. And ultimately, Audubon is a powerful network, not because of people in DC like me, but because of our members like you all across this country. So we are just getting started in this fisheries work, even though we have decades of the fantastic research and work done by people like Steve Kress. So I've had the privilege to work with some of you already on our first mobilization to stop HR 200, which was the bad fisheries bill that Charlotte was referencing earlier. And we knew that bill would decimate forage fish for birds. So in our first mobilization, we were featured in national articles like this one. And we also did things like writing LTEs, and we visited our members of Congress. And we also tweeted. We did a lot of tweeting. We posted on Facebook. We wrote policy letters. And we blasted out action alerts. And that was all in 2 weeks. So in 2 weeks, what came out of that push? Our first time ever engaging on fisheries. So we had 20,000 people sign our action alert. We sent in 10 policy statements from state offices. We had 2 in-district meetings. We had 1 letter to the editor. And ultimately, what that all added up to was we had 7 out of our 9 congressional targets vote no in this bad bill. And even though this bill ended up ultimately passing the House, it had been so poisoned by our advocacy that it has been stalled in the Senate. And it is currently being chopped up in negotiations. And what we know right now is that it's currently a series of studies. And so even if it does pass, we're not too concerned about the effect it'll have on seabirds and forage fish. So what does that mean, right? That's power. So when we talk about power, it's not some abstract concept, but it's a very real dynamic that people like you and me have the ability to shape and also to create through stepping up and speaking out. We also know that it is not enough to just win on defense. And that is why we are holding this webinar now to move forward on offense and expand protections for forage fish. And this is a way that we can take a clear and measurable step forward to increase seabirds' chances of survival. As bird lovers, it's our job to make sure that our members of Congress know that this is a central issue for us and therefore should be a central issue for them as well. So what's the plan, right? How are we going to do this? I'm going to walk you through a little strategy chart to give you a sense of what our next 6 months are going to look like. And hopefully with your help, we're going to make this happen. So first off, our goals. Our goals are the ultimate destination. Short term, we know that we need to meet with 10 members of Congress by March if we're going to get federal forage fish legislation. In the intermediate term, we know that we need to get 4 members of Congress to support federal forage fish protections by June 2019. We have 4 members of Congress because we want 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. This is a bipartisan bill, and we are a bipartisan organization because it doesn't matter who's in office. This is about our power to make sure that whoever's in office listens to the things that we have to say and the values that we have to share. And ultimately, our goal is to get federal forage fish protection by 2020. It may sound like a long way away, but it's 1 year. So our strategy. If your goals are your destination, then your strategy is the roadmap to how you're going to get there. What we are going to do is we are going to build a base of people to raise awareness about disappearing seabirds and demand action on forage fish protections to give those birds a fighting chance. When I say build a base of people, I am not talking about people over there, people on the West Coast, people on the East Coast. I am talking about you. You are the future seabird champions of America, and we need you to speak out for these little guys. So our tactics are the steps that we're going to take on our roadmap to get to our destination. So in order to meet with 10 members of Congress by March, we need to hold 10 meetings. In the intermediate, if we're going to get 4 congresspeople to support this, we're going to have to escalate. We're going to hold the DC fly-in for our grassroots activists, and we're going to hold 2 more national webinars just like this one so that activists like you from around the country can stay up to date and also stay educated on all of the resources that we have to offer. And long-term, going even further, we're going to hold 2 more national advocacy skills trainings so that folks who want to lend their voice to this cause can have the skills and be equipped with the knowledge that they need to win and to push this to victory. So, what can I do right here, right now? I have some very specific asks for you, future seabird champions of America. So if you remember from the campaign chart, we are still in that first column. So we need to hold 10 meetings with members of Congress. And in order to set ourselves up for success later on in the roadmap, there are some steps we need to take now. The first thing, I need you to build a team of 2 to 3 people. Why? So that you can hold an in-district meeting with your representative on forage fish so that your representative knows that this is an issue and it's on their radar. And ultimately, consider this a personal invitation to come out to DC in March to participate in a grassroots fly-in with us, Audubon. And what we want to do, I'm going to give a little special shout out on the DC fly-in because we have some specific goals around this. Number 1, skills building, right? This is an opportunity for us to converge, to deeply engage with this issue in the place where the decisions get made. And the best way to learn how to do a Hill meeting, if you have never done one before, is to actually do one. You don't learn to ride a bike by reading a book. Our second goal, we want to educate members of Congress. There are a lot of demands put on you as a member of Congress, and you cannot keep up with all of them. So we want to make sure that members of Congress are aware, and most importantly, that they have the right facts, that they know what's going on. And third, we want to connect and inspire our grassroots to lead the way. It's easy to feel alone when you are just one person working in the place where you are. But the truth is, there are people all over this country who are interested, invested in this, and they are also taking action. So what we want to do is bring those people to DC, connect you, hold planning sessions, get you in front of members of Congress so that you have the skills to take this back home and to continue pushing this towards victory for our long-term success. And I'm going to leave you with this thought. I am just one person in DC. Charlotte is one policy associate. Steve is one scientist up in Maine. So we can provide you with the knowledge and the skills, and we can help give you context. But ultimately, You are the people with the power. Your representatives want to listen to you, not to me. And I can help you put those pieces together, but the message has to come from constituents loud and clear. We had almost 700 people register for this call, which is a lot of people. And we know if we're going to win serious action from decision makers on forage fish, we all have to show up and put the work in. So before I leave you and we go to Q&A, just want you to know, for those of you who have a Audubon Works login, there is a Fisheries Defense Action Kit waiting for you. If you search for fisheries, it will come up. And this has the step-by-step guide with everything that you need to do to build your team, hold a meeting, and get to DC. So, oh, and for those of you who don't have Works, I will also be sending that out in an email tomorrow morning to everyone who registered. So without further ado, I know that we have some questions on the line, and we do have some time banked for Q&A. So if you have a question, please type it into the chat box, and I will start reading. Let's see, is this webinar being recorded, and can we get a link to the recording? Yes, I will send it out to registered attendees tomorrow morning. We have a question from an undergraduate student. This one looks like it's for Steve and Don. I am an undergrad student. How can we get involved with Project Puffin as an intern or a research assistant?
Well, thanks for asking. That's exactly the kind of question that I love to hear. Go to our website, projectpuffin.org, and look for where it says Get Involved. And you can follow that to several different ways. We have summer internships, and we also have opportunities for volunteers. So depending on your experience level, you can pick the opportunity that's the best fit for you. And this is not too early to start thinking about that. We make our selections usually in January.
Awesome, thank you. Loving the comments about the spunky puffins. I agree. Okay, so Sean, what can we do to help impact the legislation? Fantastic question. So just as I said, holding a meeting with either your representative or their staffer in district is hugely helpful. Like I said, it is very difficult for members of Congress and their staffers to keep track of every single thing that is happening in their state, in the country, in the world. So having constituent meetings is actually very effective at getting issues in front of decision makers. So that is a very powerful thing that you can do. And then of course, coming out to DC. All right, can we see attendees in our area so we can band together? That is a fantastic question. I don't have the capacity, Joan, to show you attendees in your area, but my contact is in, I'll be sending the email out, so reach back out to me, mwolf@audubon.org, and I'll get you set up with folks in your area. All right. Let's see, we have a question. Great webinar, so informative. I recently learned that by 2048, we are facing a serious decline in wild fish because of overfishing. Is that projection accurate? Sure. Do we have Charlotte on the line? No, I think she hopped off. Don or Steve, do you have any idea about that question?
Do you want to take a stab at that one, Don?
Oh, it looks like we have Charlotte in the office.
Okay.
Sorry, I pressed mute. I actually haven't heard that fact, but that is very stark. I can definitely check in on that, and maybe Maddox can follow up with you, Isabella.
Great. Okay. Next question. Are you collaborating with any marine institutes? For instance, Wrigley, USC Marine Institute on the West Coast. The climate change data that they are generating is interesting.
We are collaborating with biologists, especially in the Northeast, where we collecting our data. We just presented paper. In fact, the presentation that Don shared, some of that was originally prepared for the Regional Association of Researchers for the Gulf of Maine, where all the marine conservation labs and NOAA and others that care about ecosystem change met in Portland just last month. And we will also be sharing this story at the Pacific Seabird Group meeting, and where biologists from everywhere come together. So yes, one of the best ways we have of sharing this is through publications, and we have a long list of publications, growing list, and those are available on the projectpuffin.org website under publications.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve. We have a question. Working with the MSA is the key component to your proposed actions. However, there may be a need to expand this effort to the interstate fishery management commissions, which manage species in state waters. You are absolutely correct. However, we're starting with the big kahuna. We are going to expand the protections that they have on the West Coast to the East Coast so that we get comprehensive federal coverage. It will then become easier to run campaigns or make those changes in states. What things like federal forage fish legislation does is it gives one central definition for even just what a forage fish is, which is helpful for doing that work. Thank you, great question. Let's see, Craig, a trip to DC from Oregon makes a big carbon footprint. This is a reminder that our reps come home for town hall meetings. It's important that we attend and offer our comments. Wonderful perspective, Craig, thank you. All right, we have a question from Joseph. What was the very adorable young bird on the right side of a slide in the final presentation? It was mostly white with brown-gray spots and standing in the water. I think that was in my presentation. Craig, I can get back to you on that one. I am blanking on the species of that little bird. All right. Let's see. All right, more about recordings. This is all being recorded, so it will go out. You will not only have the slides, but you'll also have this whole discussion. We have a question from Amanda Adams. I think this is a good one for Don and Steve, and maybe Charlotte if we still have her. What is your advice for early career conservationists and biologists? I have worked for a few seasons monitoring shorebirds and doing habitat restoration work, but I have found that it's very difficult to find a full-time non-seasonal position.
Yeah, this is Don. I could tackle that. It is challenging to find full-time secure positions, but I think it sounds like you've developed some great experience. And I would suggest finding something you're indeed very passionate about, personal passion, and that's a very powerful thing, and people around you will recognize that. But also thinking about networking with colleagues that are working on things of interest to you is another important thing. I think if you want to reach out to myself or others via email or something, that would certainly be welcome. I guess I can share my email, dlyons@audubon.org, and I'd be happy to talk with you more about your experience and provide any wisdom I might be able to.
So thank you, Don. All right, we have a question. Thank you for your response about Marine Institute collaborations. California, lots of questions coming in. California has been successful in establishing the marine protected areas. It seems to me we're in desperate need of the same on the East Coast, a challenge. Can you speak on this at all for the East Coast? Steve, do we have any connections to marine protected areas with the monuments that you worked on?
I think the monuments is one of the best examples of how science is helping to define those monuments and to discover them and make the case that they're important, not just for fish, but for birds as well. The example that comes to mind are the puffins in Maine that we put geolocators on a few years ago, and these little tracking tags showed us that in fact they were spending their winter off of the most of the winter off the coast of the continental shelf in an area that's now the national monument. So I think that's a good example of how seabirds can lead us to areas that we should be protecting.
Thank you. All right, we have a question from Henrietta. Do you have any of the members of Congress targeted? Henrietta, fantastic question. I can tell you're a campaigner. We do have our members of Congress targeted. Again, it depends on where you are, but I can also share that list with folks as well. Let me make a note of that.
And we can also provide contact information as well for other members of Congress that are in the non-target districts if you are kind of outside of those targets.
Great, thank you. All right, and not a question, but this is the last comment in the list. It's from Ed. Can you send the link to the recording to all 1 million members and not just those who signed up? That would be most helpful. I will definitely try, Ed. Trying to get this in front of as many people as I can. All right, last call for questions. If you have anything else, submit it into the chat box. We have 3 minutes left. But if that's it, then thank you all for attending. This was a lot of information, I know, but we will be sending out a follow-up. Oh, we have one last question. How can we reach Steve Kress? Steve, I'll let you take that one.
Sure. I'm at skress@audubon.org.
Great. All right. Thank you all. For those of you on the East Coast, have a wonderful evening. For those of you on the West Coast, have a wonderful early evening. All right. Thank you for joining.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.